and the important role that 19(1)(a) has in terms of our democracy. We will now look at two other things, which are sort of attendant with 19(1)(a), the freedom of speech and expression, which is the freedom of assembly and the freedom to organize. So we will look into that on association, association and unions. So we shall look into that in greater detail. We had circulated a series of an issue to you all. We hope that some of you have been able to read it. If not, we can read it all together. We've divided ourselves into smaller groups, and Sayantan can be in one, I will be in one, and Saila will be in one. Arvind said he will join later. Late in the day, he has got some other engagement, so he'll be joining us a little later so that he can participate in the larger discussion. Okay, so that is how we are planning out today. Before we move into the actual session, is there any feedback that any of you would like to give us? How did you feel last session was? Do you see any linkages with it in terms of the real life context? Just a few voices so we know whether it was useful, not useful, whether you could relate with it in terms of realities of how and where we are in India today. I hope it was clear. Would any of you like to share after the discussion of last week?
One thing that I could relate more is the recent denial of permission to hold meetings or marches or even this thing in support of Palestine. In everywhere, Karnataka, though it's a Congress government, and I think even in Tamil Nadu, it's not allowed. That is the curtailment of our freedom to express and speech.
Okay.
Sandeep writes, personally, I think last session was something I resonated with the most in terms of personal experiences and understanding.
Okay. One or two others before we move into today's discussion.
Yeah, the last session, I mean, because the case study made me think from the perspective of the rights and responsibility rather than just as an opinion from an armchair critic or an opinion which I might have, right? So I think it's like a first step for me to start thinking about issues from the perspective of the rights rather than just having a general opinion. I think it's a good start for me, and I makes me wanting to know more about, hey, what are my rights and where else can I start exercising that and how I can.
Okay, thanks, Shivram. That was very nice. Anyone last opinion, last sharing?
I think it was useful to think of freedom of speech in relation to other constitutional rights. And in the Perumal Murugan instance, where where many of us supported the freedom of speech, as opposed to other instances like propaganda films, like the Kerala story and all, which restricts the rights of, say, minorities or gets in the way. So it was interesting to know, how freedom of speech can work in different contexts.
Okay. Thanks, all of you who shared your thoughts after the last session. We shall continue on the same in terms of the rest of the freedoms, and the fundamental question that comes up is, why are they called the fundamental freedoms? So we shall see that hopefully by the end of today's session we'll have greater clarity on that. I had circulated a case this morning. I hope all of you have had a chance to read it. If not, let's have a look at it. Okay, I mean, though this is a imaginary case study, this is actually based on real life events. Okay, so we've removed out the names and the other things, but more or less it's on the context of how different groups and different parties have had to contend with the government when they were trying to assert their right of freedom of speech and expression in any meaningful way. So can somebody read this? one paragraph, one person. You all know the method by now.
I'll start.
Go ahead.
Protect the Earth is an NGO working on preserving India's fragile ecosystem in the Western Ghats region. Protect the Earth was registered under the Societies Registration Act and has since then been receiving contributions from well-meaning and environmentally conscious citizens in the global north. Protect the Earth is authorized to receive contributions as the organization is registered under the Foreign Contributions Regulation Act.
Okay. Somebody else read the next one.
I'll go.
Sorry.
Sorry. Protect the Earth works under the leadership of its charismatic leader, Avatar, who has consistently exposed the violations of existing environmental regulations by both the corporate sector, with the complicity of the Pollution Control Board and State Environment Department.
Somebody else read the next paragraph.
Avatar has
Yeah.
brought public attention to the pollution caused by the MNC chemical company in the Western Ghats, which is polluting both water, air, and soil. The company's operations are affecting local agriculture and causing health problems to local people. The government regulatory departments are complicit with the company and giving them a clean chit. The issue has become a major controversy, with Avatar writing extensively in the press, organizing public discussions in meeting halls, and organizing protests in front of the office of the district collector and also the chief minister.
Thanks. Okay. Somebody else?
The CM is upset with the negative publicity he's receiving and decides that Avatar and Protect the Earth must be silenced. So he directs the police to file an FIR against Avatar for violations of the FCRA Act, as well as an FIR under Section 152 of the BNS, Section 113 of BNS, and other sections, alleging that the actions of Protect the Earth are a threat to the unity, integrity, and economic security of India. Following this, their FCRA account was closed and their bank accounts frozen.
Somebody else read the last two paragraphs.
Separately, the MNC company has also issued a legal notice claiming damage of rupees 1 crore for defaming and destroying their reputation. Avatar comes to the Bring Home the Constitution group for legal advice. What advice would you provide on whether the CM's actions violate, protect the earth, and Avatar's right to speech, assembly, and association?
Okay. So this is the context. You all understood the situation? Does anybody have any doubt, clarity, any clarification? Okay. If you don't have any doubt or clarification that you require, then let's get into the smaller group. There are 28 people. Sign them. You can randomly mix up people so people can get into various groups. Please discuss if this issue is now coming up before you all. What are you all going to do? What are you all going to say? What are you all going to propose as a line of action for Avatar and Protect the Earth group? Yeah, I think it's clearer now.
I'll also repost the case study in the group in case you can't find it. So how long for this? 30 minutes?
About 15-20 minutes.
Okay.
Same way, one person in each group prepares a summary, which you shall then present in the plenary. Okay. So Article 19(1)(a), freedom of speech and expression, 19(1)(b), assembly, okay, and 19(1)(c), organize. To form associations or unions.
I'll open the rooms.
Yeah. We have also in the same case study given you section 113 of the BNS and 152 of the BNS. That's a new law which has replaced IPC. Yeah.
Okay, I'm opening breakout rooms. So it's 8:12 now. We'll come back by 8:30.
Yeah. Spotlight then, Sandra. Okay, shall we? We hope that the three groups have had some meaningful discussion. There was obviously a couple of hiccups in all the groups that I could see whenever I entered in. But would somebody start presenting? Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, anybody can start. What was the type of discussion you had? What is it that you will advise Avatar and the group?
Okay, from our group, we decided that we will advise Avatar to do three things. One is make sure they have the support of the community. So gather the affected community, one. Two, gather precedents where cases of economic security versus right to life of affected people have been successfully argued. So get precedents and other case studies. And three, go to court, because we felt that 113 does not apply, because Avatar and his organization were exercising their right to speech, right to assembly, and right to form associations. They were not engaged in any violence or exciting or inciting violence. So 113 did not apply, in our opinion. Defamation did not apply because we felt that it's a public corporation and their activities, talking about their public activities is a valid exercise of free speech, and they should have a thick skin since they are in the public domain. And the economic security argument, as it applies to the economic security, anything that threatens the economic security of India means that India is we the people, and hence anything that threatens the economic security of a section of the people, in this case by threatening their right to life, air, water, and agriculture and livelihood. It can be challenged, saying that it is actually threatening the economic security of a part of the people of India, in this case, the affected community. So we will advise him to gather folks, get precedents, and go to court. That's it.
Thanks. Welcome, Arvind. We're just having the presentation of the discussions. Other two groups?
Yeah, so we did not come to a conclusion as to what our action should be or advice should be to Avatar, but there were discussions on the particular section of 113, especially whether this actually construed a terrorist act we just went through the act again. So 113, I mean, if it can be construed, come under 113, because it's quite broadly defined in terms of what a terrorist act is, right? So even if it disrupts public functioning of either the public functionary or even day-to-day activities of the general public, right? So, or even threaten to disrupt anything, right? So it could be construed any of these act of organizing people together to protest, or protesting in front of district collector could have affected all of what I've just said above. So fact that it is defined, terrorist act is defined so broadly, makes the room for the cops to file this under terrorist act. So we were just discussing about that, but also regarding the defamation case, questions of whether corporates should be allowed to accuse any accusations. How do you call something as a frivolous accusation or a valid accusation, right? So if the accusation itself is true, then can defamation case still be filed? So how do we stop frivolous accusations? Was something that we'll discuss. And yeah, I mean, overall feeling was, of course, shocked at the government's actions, and we should, of course, one of the opinions was definitely to gather public support for protect the earth. Group, please, if I miss anything, please listen. But yeah.
Thanks, Shivam. That is quite cogently presented. The third group, does anybody from Shivram's group have anything to add?
No, it's clear. But thank you, Shivam.
Third group?
Yeah, so we did not come to any conclusion. So we did not even decide who will basically present. So all of us are silent. But yeah, so see, there were different points of views that had come. One point of view was that on one side, when they are fighting for the environmental issues, on the other side, if they had done violations with respect to the law, is the government not entitled to file a case under the FCRA Act and so on? The other thing that came in is, I think broadly there was agreement with respect to filing of a case under the Terrorist Act is completely uncalled for and it is unfair. And then there was some discussion about this inclusion of economic security, which seems to have been included as an amendment in 2013. So therefore,
that was included in the UAP Act, but now it's part of BNS.
BNS, right? So therefore, that economic security, including that as an act itself, in the act itself, seems to be unfair. Is something that was also spoken. The other points that were made is that it is not only violation of it is not only to stifle freedom of speech and expression or to organize by the organization, but it's also against right to life and livelihood, because there is issue of livelihood of farmers, right to life of people, whenever there is an environmental damage that is being done. So therefore, there were two sets of things that were discussed. One is to fight it legally, of course, in the court. The other thing is to expose the nexus between the government and the corporate in the field, and how such cases are being filed unfairly when you test for the environmental issues. So these are different points and opinion. Please, others, please add in. There was also a point made by one person with respect to how organizations that she was able to see, who have been working for the poor, for the charity work and all that, their FCRA is being, suddenly stopped. The license is suddenly stopped, and how such organizations are suffering because of that. So that experience was also shared. So this is the overall thing that. Anything else, Abhishek?
Yeah. So Jairam has actually summed it up very well. I just wanted to add one final point that we were discussing, saying which fundamental right was being denied. So the government was denying which fundamental right. So we felt to form associations or unions, this was being denied, because FCRA, you are putting some hold on the money. So then day-to-day functioning of the organization becomes difficult, and it is in some way directly or indirectly affecting the right to form associations or unions. This is what I wanted to add. Thank you, Jairam.
Is only the right to association being violated, or any other rights?
I mean, right to life is being violated. I mean, one of our members, I think Geetakshi, said that she had highlighted. So right to live, that is being violated by the MNC. So then that is also a case here. But other than that, I don't think we discussed anything.
No. Now, I mean, apart from, you can go beyond what you discussed. Since you came to the conclusion that the right to form associations has been curtailed. In addition to that, is there any other right which is also word? Anybody? I mean, it can
Yeah,
be
I
beyond
think
the
right to expression also it came up during our discussion.
In
Also,
what way? Yeah.
I think in response to the press articles
Yeah.
that Avatar wrote, the state decided to take the disproportionate measure. So probably as a message to not voice or not expose what is going on. I think maybe my group people or anybody else can add.
Okay. Let's. Yeah.
And I would like to add one point that, and also the MNC, that factory or company is also violating the livelihood of the workers. So they are also very directly affected with that pollutants or pollution.
But if the factory shut down, workers will also lose livelihood even then, no?
No, here not to here motive is not to shut down the factory. So whatever the requirements, so they before setting the factory, what they are agreed according to the norms. So they have to maintain the process.
No, but
Otherwise, they
Satish, the problem has come because they're not maintaining it. The problem has come because the government is not enforcing it.
Yes.
So going back to some norm that is there on paper, how is it going to be of help? You get it, no?
Okay. Yeah, I get it already. What I'm saying that we have to make an issue that not putting this issue with the NGO. This is a social security issue. This is the people's issue. So like that, they have to take on the issue in a broader way, so that they can get support from the those who are affected, the people, and from the other organizations also we can include. That's
okay.
So I think, I mean, very often, see these environmental issues, especially, there are no simple solutions about, because as we have seen in any industry, there'll be hundreds or even thousands of workers involved. So very often you will find that in most environmental cases, you will have the workers being pitted against the local people, or many of the local people, do not come forward to protest, because it will also mean their own family members who are probably employed in that industry, and if that industry is shut down, they will lose their livelihood. So they may even oppose environmentalists taking on these issues because they may lose their jobs altogether and their means of livelihood. So, none of these really, offer very simple solutions. It's in reality is far more complex. You see a lot more dynamics which are taking place in the field. So you do have situations where trade unions very often don't take up the issue of pollution for the simple reason that they lose jobs. And even if their own family members are being affected by the pollution, or even they themselves, the first set of people who are going to be affected are the workers themselves. So they end up with a lot of occupational diseases. They may have, shorter lifespans, but they still continue to work because that becomes the only source of livelihood. So these are the realities that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis when you are. And of course, forget about the MNCs. What if it's a small industry? A lot of small-scale industries, medium-sized industries, where somebody has borrowed heavily to set up that factory. So any environmental issues would also mean ruin to the entrepreneur or to the industrialist who has set it up. So
yeah,
these are also issues come up.
Let's
okay,
get.
here.
Yes, Satish.
Yeah, okay. And here, in some cases, what we are doing is here. It's okay. It is better to put a case on those departments. Okay, those who are not enforcing these pollutions.
But Satish,
why can't we put it?
No, we are talking very general now. Here is a group which has been affected, Avatar and his group, and they're coming to you all to them saying that you go file a case against the Pollution Control Board for not doing their jobs, the Environmental Department for not monitoring the way they should be doing, are general issues.
Okay.
Okay. Now let's come back to the issue that we've been discussing, which is Article 19(1)(a), which is freedom of speech and expression, 19(1)(b), which is assembly, okay, and 19(1)(c), which is to form associations. Okay. Now, as we discussed last time, the fundamental freedoms are not absolute in India. They are limited by certain conditions which are given in the same article itself. So Article 19(1)(a), B, C, D, E, F has been removed, and G are the fundamental freedoms. Then Articles 19(2) to 19(6) contain what are called the restrictions. Okay. And it's been said that their restrictions should be reasonable, because the important thing is the fundamental right. And these restrictions are provided basically because you have to factor in the possibility that there might be situations in which unconditional freedom can actually be counterproductive. That was a discussion in the Constituent Assembly also. Actually, there was a lot of debate on it. So if you now see 19(2), a little about 19(1)(a), freedom of speech and expression, B, assemble peaceably. Now it's not assemble alone, but without arms. Now, why was it added without arms? These are all issues that we need to look at. To form associations or unions or cooperative societies. Cooperative societies was added much later. It was originally associations or unions. To move freely throughout the territory of India, to reside and settle in any part of India, and to practice any profession or to carry on any occupation, trade, or business. The last two, E and G, became big issues during COVID time. You know, where people were migrating to different places and they were forced to migrate back to their homes. They walked. And then after that, economic issues became so dire, they had to go back to work in various places. And do they have the right to practice a profession wherever, became big issues. But we will now confine ourselves to the first three: freedom of speech and expression, peaceably without arms, and form associations.
Let's
Yeah.
go to the restriction.
Okay, now let's see the restrictions. Now, for example, when in the case study, we gave you about defamation. Now look at the restriction. Article 19(2) is a restriction to freedom of speech and expression, which we did last time. One of the issues on which free speech can be restricted is defamation. If you can see that, the last line, decency or morality or in relation to contempt of court, defamation or incitement to an offense. Okay, so the issue of defamation is one of the conditions which is said to be reasonable. But the question is, what is defamation? When will it be defamation? Are still issues to be resolved. Okay.
So just to give you some clarity on how to read it. So when you read A, that is 19(1)(a), which is the freedom of speech and expression, you have to read it alongside 2, clause 2. Nothing in subclause A of clause 1. What is subclause A of clause 1? That is freedom of speech and expression. So you read A and then come to subsection 2, which is the restriction. Now B is to assemble peaceably and without arms. Now the restriction on B is in subclause 3. Nothing in subclause B of the said clause shall affect the operation of any existing law in so far as it imposes or prevents the state from making any law imposing in the interest of the sovereignty and integrity of India or public order reasonable restrictions on the right, on the exercise of the right conferred by the sub. Now go back to the case study that you have seen today. The first thought that all of you should do when you say that a permission to carry out a protest or somebody has filed a case against you is to take the Constitution and see whether the restriction falls within the clauses 3 and 4. So this is clause 3 is your right to assemble without arms can be restricted by law in the interest of sovereignty and integrity of India or public order. So these are the only 2 grounds on which the right to assemble can be restricted. So the first thing all of you should do is, when there is a restriction on your freedom to assemble, see whether it is affecting the sovereignty and integrity of India or public order. This is the first thing that should come to your mind. So that is the test that you have to pass. And when you're looking at the right to form associations or unions, go to subclause 4. Nothing in subclause C of the said clause shall affect the operation of any existing law insofar as it imposes or prevents the state from making any law imposing in the interest of the, again, sovereignty and integrity, public order. Here they have added morality. So your right to form associations or unions is in addition to sovereignty and integrity or public order, even morality can become a reason to restrict that right. So again, every test you please keep in mind the restrictions and see whether it falls within those clauses. This is just to tell you how to read the act, how to read the constitution.
There's one question by Shankar. Does defamation as stated in 19.2 apply to corporations or people or state only?
See, the defamation, see, apart from, see, the imposing here is by the state, as against the state. But, there is civil defamation and criminal defamation, which is part of your Indian Penal Code. The BNS makes defamation a offense. So that even corporations can invoke defamation. They can claim damages, which is a civil remedy available. So in effect, they'll be curtailing your right in an indirect way.
See, what we need to understand is that Article 19(1)(a), (b), etc. gives us our fundamental rights, the freedoms, and subclause 2 to 6 provide the reasonable restrictions. Okay, this is the broad principle of our rights. What happens in reality is that when there are moves to curtail our rights, they take recourse to other laws, like the criminal laws.
Because if you see the section, it says it shall not prevent the state from making any law.
Okay.
So what is this any law? Which is your BNS today. It can be the Police Act, which we didn't bring to your notice, but yeah, so it can be your UAPA. So the state, the constitution itself authorizes the state to bring in legislations to restrict the right for the reasons of sovereignty and integrity of India, public order, and morality as far as trade unions are concerned and associations are concerned. So BNS is one such law which the state is legitimately making.
Okay, so now they have filed an FIR and they have invoked section 113 and 152. In one of the discussions, I had chance to visit all the 3 groups. Some interesting responses were there. One response was to say, let Avatar leave the organization and go. Let the organization take care of itself. Okay, because now that 113 and 152 have been invoked and there's a possibility of arrest, let him get away. That was one type of a thing. One group said, let the whole organization be closed down. Only if they are alive will there be any chance of getting arrested or prosecution. If it's closed down, then what will happen? Okay, now these were some of the responses in the group. The third group was to say that how can it become economic security become a terrorist act? Okay. Now, unfortunately or fortunately, the Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita has now incorporated in the general penal law of India a provision which existed only in the terrorist law under the UAPA. Now they have brought it into the main law, and one of the issues on which a person can be arrested as a terrorist is if you are affecting the economic security of economic security of the country. Now, who defines economic security? Who defines whether an action of yours is right or wrong? Okay, and this is the issue that we are facing in India today. That the moment you start asking questions from the government, what does the present government tell us? What does the media talk about it? Can anybody say? It's happening day in, day out. We are seeing it in the papers.
Anti-national.
Geetakshi, yeah, anti-national. Moment you start asking questions from the government, you're being called anti-national. Now, we saw last week that one of the foundational principles of constitutional democracy is the freedom of speech. Now, part of the freedom of speech is based on the right to dissent. the right to question those in authority, the right to seek accountability. These are all part of the right to speech and expression. It does not mean only you talk. You can also ask these things. But asking those things have now become criminalized. Okay, so now they're criminalizing acts which are based on constitutional and fundamental rights given to us. Okay, so the action of enforcing our rights itself becomes a criminal act, as we saw in this particular thing. Now, Jairam is here. Jairam is part of a very major anti-corruption group in Chennai. For the part that he asked questions from the ministers of the previous government, he and his organization are facing about 20 civil defamation cases, each of them asking for damages of 1 crore and above. Okay. Likewise, Greenpeace has, many other organizations have. So when you now come down to look at the scope of Article 19(1)(b), first thing that we'll have to keep in mind is that, as Saila pointed out, what are the laws governing the exercise of the right to assemble? Now, the laws there are broadly laws relating to the police, which under the colonial laws, we had the District Police Act or the City Police Act. Every state has its own. I mean, it's almost the same across India. We have the various police acts. So we need to know what the police acts are saying. Okay. Second thing is, in earlier times, it was IPC. Now it's a BNS. Third, you also have special laws like the Chhattisgarh Special Public Security Act, the MACOCA, Maharashtra Control of Organized Crimes Act, and various, Kashmir has its own Special Powers Act. Northeast has some of these laws. So when we are now looking at the exercise of these fundamental rights, we have to also look at what are the laws which will then be invoked by the state to deny us the rights, our exercise of our rights. Okay, so that's the second part that we need to look at, okay, in terms of the basic principle about it. Third is that I was asking in each of the groups, how do you ask in a constitutional way? Many people were shocked that how can you invoke terrorism into something which is talking about polluting the atmosphere and polluting water and air? How can that become terrorism? And it's a good question to ask. I was a little worried, scared actually, to ask a question after that, which is that if you start, in fact, one of the groups talked about the PFI, the banning of the PFI. One of the issues that came up is the fact that if you were to, if this group, BHTC group, is to support a group which has been dubbed to be terrorist, will there be a danger of them being dubbed terrorist also? Okay, I was too scared to ask that question lest next class there's nobody in the class. If all of you are going to run, get away from it. But it's possible. It's possible that a class like this, meant to teach us about the Constitution, can be seen by the government as being anti-national. Because they only want yes people in the country. They don't want people to exercise independent critical thinking. Political parties are also not wanting that, which is why we are in the state that we are in today. Okay, so it leaves us, the citizens, to become more conscious, to become more active in demanding and asserting these rights. So one of the things that was discussed about, when we go to the people, we have to do three things. One, we have to tell people that Avatar and the group was exercising their fundamental right of speech and expression. And tell people, you also have a right of fundamental speech, a fundamental right of speech. Okay, to demand accountability from the various government servants. It is not something that you're doing for us or we are doing for you. We are doing it together for the purpose of a fundamental right. Second one is that now, if you are alone talking about it, if Avatar is alone talking about it, how many people will listen to him? Okay, not few people, maybe a few friends of his will listen. But if Avatar is speaking in the name of a group, okay, more people will listen. Now, you go back to the principle that we talked about. Constitutional democracy principle is you're replacing the bullet by the ballot. You're replacing one ruling party with another group, which is challenging the ruling party, saying, no, this ruling party is not good. They are corrupt. They are inefficient. They have not made proper policy, etc. How do you do it unless you go to the people and tell them the faults that the ruling party has made. Okay. Now, if talking that issue itself is seen as anti-national, okay, then what is the meaning in the constitution that we are having? Fundamental rights that we are being promised. So that's a second part that we need to keep in mind when we are looking at the interplay of these three rights. The third, so if you have a fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression, by itself is important, but by itself is not sufficient unless we are able to bring people together, okay, and assemble and coordinate. The third thing is that just getting few people together is not sufficient by itself. You also need to come together to form an association or a union to assert your right. Okay. So A, B, and C are interlinked with each other. So when we are talking, even in our language, we need to talk this language of rights.
Protest is also a form of expression. See, I mean, that is one thing that I think all of us should bear in mind, that when we are looking at the word freedom of speech and expression, expression is a very, very wide category. It can be through posters, we can maybe graffiti, cartoons. I think when we were discussing speech and expression, we looked at it. So it could be visual, it could be songs, it could be dance, anything. So expression is also a collective expression. So B and C is essentially ensuring that we also embedded in A is also collective expression. Because ultimately collectives is what gives us the strength. And makes the voice louder, essentially makes us more visible. Arvind,
Arvind, would you like to come in here?
Just to
louder,
supplement.
Arvind,
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speak closer to the mic. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So just to supplement the point, which if you can't hear me, please let me know. So I'll speak slower, I'll speak louder. I think there's some problem with the internet. I can't quite figure out. But anyway, the 19.1 A, B, and C, right, are, as already indicated by both Suresh and Saila, very, very important. Speech, of course, is the foundational point. The second is the entire question of association. Again, why association, right? And that's a very important point for us to also think about. And we often, again, you go back to actually Arendt's idea of in On Revolution, where she puts the point that you think of America as a democracy, talking about America at that moment.
Arvind, you may have to say who Hannah Arendt is.
Hannah Arendt is a German philosopher. She wrote a book called Origins of Totalitarianism, which is very important. Also, another book called On Revolution. And she makes the point, when you think about the United States as a democracy, the core dimension of the democracy is the fact that there forms of associated living, also associations, which is central to the country. Associations of working people, associations of a range of groups, of sports people, different forms of association. Associations are what give strength to the idea of a democracy. It's not enough to say that you have the right to speech alone, because unless you form associations or you're part of associations, firstly, they give meaning to your life. That's one part of it. Second part is they allow you to challenge a certain kind of status quo. They allow you to express your opinion, which has been taken seriously by the state. So the range of reasons why associations are absolutely central and absolutely key. One more dimension of associations, one I'll add, is again, right. I mean, Suresh made this point just now, almost as a joke, which is he said, "I hope you don't get scared, right, with the fact that we're saying that this could form. For example, this could be thought of as a grouping which is in support of separatist ideas under the BNS, or in support of of anti-national activity, etc. Right? And the question is, I mean, he said it, but it's not easy, right? I mean, it's not easy for anybody to take any sense of security from saying that what happens if you're targeted. And Saila made the point that what happens if you're targeted is you have to have the confidence or the feeling that you're part of a group, right? And that's where your sense of the idea of, again, going back to Roosevelt, right? He put forth the idea of 4 freedoms, right? the freedom to to worship, the freedom from want, and the freedom from fear. Right? That's where the freedom from fear really comes from. So the idea, right? I mean, if you feel fearful of the state targeting you, that's a natural condition. You will feel fearful because you're alone. And the way to target that loneliness is by forming association. So it's a very, very important part of a democracy, the idea of an association. So in a sense, if we look at the Narmada Bachao Andolan, I mean, the people of the Narmada Valley were able to express their opinion because they had an association. Civil liberties groups like the PUCL are able to take forward a certain viewpoint because of the strength of the idea of the association. And of course, it goes back to, we'll try and look at that a little in the little time that we have, is Kanavaran's piece, right? Where it talks about the idea of, where is the central idea of an association in that really very, very brilliant piece that he puts out, is it emerges initially in the context of the trade union movement. Again, what is the trade union movement? The idea that, I mean, if I individually, I express my dissent from the management, they throw me out. But you get together as a group, it's a little more challenging for the management to throw out two people who are banded together, who come together as an association. So you get a strength of the centrality, the importance of association, both as a way of challenging the status quo, as a way of asserting your strength vis-a-vis the state, of combating your own sense of fear. Right? So it's a psychological level, it's very, very important. It's important at a very pragmatic and practical level. And it's also important at the level of the idea of what you do with the association that you form. And also important at the level of the person, right? I mean, you think of it, right? I mean, what is the Hobbes critique, right? That man is what violent, solitary, brutish, life of man is violent, solitary, brutish, and short, right? How does the life of mankind or humankind become less brutish, less violent? It is through forming association. So it's a very important dimension, and it's very important. Even I'm glad, in a sense, taking it out. I'm glad you're a part of this course because in a sense you're a part of an association, and that association gives you strength. It gives you strength. It gives you a chance to develop your way of thinking. It gives you a chance to say things which you can't otherwise say. Again, it's a simple point, right? If you have a dissenting imagination, or when you think a little differently, you need to nourish that way of thinking. If you don't nourish that way of thinking, it will die. How do you nourish that way of thinking? You nourish that way of thinking through forms of association. So it's a very, very central, very, very important dimension, which we're talking about from many, many standpoints. And the state recognizes that, which is why the state at every point in time tries to clamp down in through diverse ways. The Duration Sala mentioned the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, the even simple, right? Very, very, very simple laws, which you think you have to look at through this frame. For example, what we realized is previously, if the organization I was a part of, I am associated with the Alternative Law Forum, right? We were initially an unregistered society. We were not registered on the Societies Act. But we needed to have a bank account because that's how you're able to function as a group. Others, it's impossible to function without a bank account. But at that moment in time, if you're an unregistered association of persons, you could open a bank account. Today, the state has restricted the ability of yours to open a bank account to people who are registered associates. So you see a range of ways in which the right to association is being targeted or being sought to be minimized or hollowed out by the state. So it tells you the centrality and the importance of the idea of the right to association. Sorry, I'll stop with that.
Thanks, Arvind. I just want to ask the entire group one question. Okay. It'll be a little hard question, so be prepared for it, which is that most of you, the first thought is that let's go to the courts. Okay. Now, in the end of the case study, it was like this Avatar and his group is approaching the BHTC group. Okay, there's a particular reason why we put it as that, because most of you are not lawyers. But yet you are thinking as lawyers, go to the court. Okay. Now, Arvind had just now talked about, how do we develop a constitutional consciousness, or how do we develop, begin to develop a constitutional way of thinking? So if we were to develop that way of thinking, one, we got very worried about the fact that just the act of asking questions about a polluting unit resulted in a terrorist charge being put against the person. Okay. So much so that most of us in the Kodam today were not able to get to the question. I'm not saying all, I'm saying most, of a fundamental issue that we would need to think about. How can this group of non-lawyers, perhaps a few lawyers, also not think about coming out with a public statement to say that the group was only exercising the right under Article 19(1)(a), B, and C, and that the government, by using the law, is actually abusing the law to prevent the fundamental rights from coming. Okay. And I want to ask the question to all of you. Say, why is it that that thought is not coming? Why is it that immediately we think of going to the courts, go to the lawyers? But the moment it goes to the court, community has no role in that. It's a fight between the lawyer, your lawyer, and the lawyer on the government side and the judge. People have no more role in that. Okay, and this is becoming a big, big issue. And the question that I would like to ask all of us is, what is it that is preventing us? See, talking about constitution is very nice until the crunch comes. And the crunch is here now. When the crunch comes, we go back into our normal thing of saying, I don't want to have anything to do with it, or let's take it to the courts.
So I think the more fundamental question is, I mean, let's all be very honest. Is there a sense of fear in all of us? When we, I mean, Suresh has been telling about how Arap Jairam, who's now part of this meeting, he's facing 15 defamation cases, and he had several FIRs against him, which got quashed finally. But when these kind of issues are brought out, is there an element of fear that is there within each of us?
Yes.
Of course, there is. I mean, there is fear. No doubt that
Yes.
is the first thing that comes. What if this happens to us? How would we tackle this situation? And
Others?
Shivram writes, yes, sense of fear of being alone in this and not confident of being able to defend oneself. Sandeep writes, lately I realize it's a yes, and that fear is deeply ingrained and conditioned.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think this is the most, yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
in my point of view, that people are coming only to the economical issues. They're reacting more towards the economical issues and not reacting to the other issues.
No, here we are talking about yourself. You, Satish,
No,
what
no.
are you feeling? Is there fear? It's a very simple question.
No. We don't have fear. What I am trying to say is that, okay, today the constitution having the both sides. One is that they are giving our right, and they have a right to detain our right. Okay, and this constitution out of all over the India, how many people will know the fundamental rights? Because the more the Indian literacy rate is very low with compared to the other Western countries and
Satish,
other countries.
Satish, the question is, are people ignorant, or are people made to be ignorant?
And
No, both.
Because
Both.
if you see, I don't agree with you on one point. It is not the ordinary people who have who were willing to take all the risks and the dangers and to fight. They fought against Indira Gandhi during emergency.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
and they overthrew her and they brought a change in law. Across the farmers' movement, for example, 2 years back, all of us, it's what we are seeing. We are also seeing it now. Farmers' movement challenged the government, and they were able to win a very, very important victory. So it is not ignorance of the law alone. It's not the fact of education. It is a fact that education has resulted in us not being able to think critically and to take a principled stand.
Yeah, so
Okay.
Spence puts it there. There's a conditioning. So, I mean, the reason why the word fear, I mean, taking cue from what Arvind was saying, first is very important for all of us to acknowledge, yes, there is fear lurking somewhere in the background, sometimes more, sometimes less, but it is always present. So first is to acknowledge the existence of that fear. And secondly, the right to form associations is essentially, as individuals, since we all of us have that fear, being together helps us to somewhat overcome that fear, or at least to deal with that fear. There is strength in groups. You know, there is strength in feeling that, okay, I'm not in it alone. We are all in it together. So there is a strength in that, which helps us to overcome that fear and articulate and demand and assert our rights much more. Now, the reason why you will find government agencies coming down very strongly on this right, which is there in A, B, and C, is precisely this, that coming together helps us to overcome our fears and helps us to assert our rights. And the government is, the state agencies are exactly in fear of that, of citizens overcoming the fear and coming together. So that is why, you know, the FCRA, the Police Act, telling you, you can't hold meeting here, you can only hold at a particular place, at a particular time. You want to take a procession, it can only be along a particular route. And then, you know, rejecting, now see how we have all, you know, normalized the fundamental right to carry out a, you know, assemble is there. But in the state, in seeking to regulate it today, there is a law which says that we have to get the permission of the police if you want to take out a protest. So ultimately, who's deciding your right? The policeman sitting there. He decides, no, today you cannot express yourself. Tomorrow you can express yourself in a particular place at a particular time. Then today even conditions are being imposed as to what you can speak, what you cannot speak. So how as a society we are slowly giving in to these conditions. We are also feeling it's normal. Oh, you want to have a protest? Okay, let's apply for police permission. If the police doesn't give, okay, let's cancel it. We can't do anything. Police has not given us the permission. So suddenly your fundamental right, I mean, the word fundamental is just gone. It is now something, if the policeman allows, we exercise it. If the policeman does not allow, we give it up. So we have almost normalized that today in across the country, except I think during the CAA protests, where without permissions there has, and that strength came from how? Because of the large numbers. So it is the numbers which gave us the strength to defy, you know, even when police denied permission, and the farmers. It's the numbers which has given them the strength. So that is why the criticality of the rights under B and C, which is what I think Arvind was mentioning, how this BC is so critical for the assertion of your right in under A, 19(1)(a).
Now, see, one of the conditions, the reasonable restrictions on the freedom of assembly and the freedom of forming associations is the whole issue of law and order, is issue of public order. Like I said, one is sovereignty and integrity of the state, and the second one is public order. If you remember last time, Saila was explaining to you the difference between law and order and public order. Okay, this is in the form of a picture. If you would see, law and order is the outside part. Okay, can you all see the image?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah. So law and order is the outside part. Then a smaller subset is a public order, and a much smaller one is the security of the state. Okay. So generally what happens is law and order happens on a day-to-day basis everywhere. Not every incident of law and order problem is either a public order or a security of state. So the restrictions under Article 19(3) is on the ground of public order. Okay. Now, the ruling party and the officials would obviously like to say that any law and order problem is a public order problem, because then it gives them the legitimacy of clamping down on people, you know, on making the law very harsh and denying people their fundamental rights. And of course, security of state is a much smaller thing. Not all acts of law and order and public order will be threats to security of state.
So, I mean, if you see from the discussion and even the case study, it is a constant endeavor on the part of the state to keep narrowing down our rights or the expression of our rights. And it is the duty of the citizens to ensure that that narrowing down doesn't happen. And we should keep at it at every point in time to safeguard our rights and ensure that what is in part 3 of the Constitution is something which we enjoy and we are able to assert ourselves. And we need to flex our muscles so that the space is not narrowed down and we are not boxed in a way that we get suffocated. So that is a constant challenge before all of us. Are we going to allow us to be placed, for all the citizens and all our rights to be put in a narrow box? Or are we going to ensure and constantly resist that and ensure that, we expand our horizons and expand the rights?
Okay, before we invite Arvind in, this is one thing that we needed to talk about, which is the right to protest. Like I said, the fundamental rights are curtailed by laws, not necessarily in the Constitution, but by other laws, including the Police Act, including the Criminal Procedure Code of the earlier times, and now the Bharatiya BNSS, Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, no, Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita, this tongue-twisting names. Okay. Now, one of the things that we come about is when you are assembling and you are protesting, the question that is now very important in the country is that media, which is now the Godi media, is now making it out as though right to protest itself is wrong. Now, this first thing is right to ask questions from the government is wrong. Ask accountability from the government is wrong. And third, right to protest itself is wrong. Okay. Now, this case went up from the Mazdoor Kisan Sangram Samiti, Shakti Sanghatan from Rajasthan, where they went to the court in terms of Jantar Mantar, that famous place in Delhi where protests take place. Every city has a place which is designated protest site. You can't protest anywhere else but there. And many times these places are in one corner, which will not affect the flow of traffic or whatever. Now, precisely the issue of protest is to bring to the public attention an issue. What has the government done? Of course, supported by the courts, they put it to one corner where nobody is going to be watching what you're going to do. You can shout all you want to shout. You can protest all you want to protest. And that's not going to be of any consequence because regular life will not be affected. Now, this was an issue which went up, MKSS went to the Supreme Court, and they said that this attempts of trying to prevent us from going to protest is unlawful, it's violative of the Constitution. Now, Jairam and his group, Arappor Iyakam, wanted to organize a protest about 2 Sundays back, on the issue of Adani and evidence that they had gathered and complaints they had given about Adani's role in a coal scam. 1 month back in December, they gave a letter asking permission from the police. 1 day before the event, they were told that permission is being denied and they cannot have it. Okay. Now, fundamental questions arise from that. So, one, are we really entitled to protest in a peaceful way? Because what does it say? Assemble peaceably without arms. Okay, Arappor is not wanting to say that they're going to come up with arms. Likewise, across the country today, protests even against, for example, Palestine is not being permitted. Okay, the police and the last time we saw in Perumal Murugan's case, the police used the thing of law and order problem to deny you and our rights. The courts are very clear. They cannot use it's a duty of the state to ensure law and order. The police and the government cannot use law and order as an excuse to deny us our fundamental right. Okay. Now, while the protesters can protest in a very in a very voluble way, so long as they are not taking up weapons or trying to threaten violence, they cannot be prevented from protesting or showing their expressing their opinions. Okay. Now, protests are also regulated through various other laws. Okay. Now, the question that is coming up before us is this attempt of pushing people into one corner and only having, like, for example, Freedom Park in Bangalore, okay, like Azad Maidan in Bombay, Jantar Mantar in Delhi. Then we have some places in Chennai. Every city has its own place. Now, there are questions being raised. Is this violative of our fundamental right? Okay, these are questions which we still need to agitate, take to the courts. And our experience is that unless we launch citizens' movements, demand these issues as a general right, courts will also not respond in the same way.
See, for instance, most trade unions today are prohibited from protesting against the factory in which they are working. They are not allowed to assemble outside the factory gates and protest. Then they are asked to either move to these designated places, or very often the employer goes to court and gets an order saying that they must be 500 meters away from the gate of the factory. So the whole purpose of the workers protesting is in their place of employment is to get their voices heard. So now how do we understand this shrinking of space for our democratic rights is something all of us have to bear in mind. So next time you just read a news item, this is the thought that should come to you.
So,
Maybe
I think Arvind should come in. Just before that, Arvind's colleague, Aishwarya, in Bangalore, she's not a lawyer. Okay, she's an activist. She's been doing other things. She's a media person. When in the Palestine issue, the police, Bangalore police, rejected their attempts to have a meeting, she went and fought with the police and said, it's a fundamental right. How can you violate our fundamental right? How can you deny us our right? It's our right to protest against the policy of the government of India, okay, and not taking up on, on various issues. It's our right. And by you preventing us, you are actually not only violating the fundamental right, you're denying us a violating. So we just thought we'll bring it to you. The thing. We need to keep countering it and opposing you. Over to you, Arvind.
Yeah. Just a couple of quick points. Shazan, can I share my screen as well?
Yeah. Wait 1 sec.
Yeah. So, yeah. No, I want to just finish the fear discussion. Just the point being that sometimes we think fear is something only we are experiencing, and I think it's right. I think everybody acknowledged, and it's a fair point. All of us feel fear. It's not unique to some people, and some people are fearless. That's not the case. The point is, you experience fear. What do you do about the fear? That's the question. That's one question. The other question is the question of fear and the experience of fear is not unique to our time period. The emergency, for example, the key experience of the emergency in psychological sense was a sense of fear. The experience of the colonial rule again was a sense of fear. And leadership is about how you're able to deal with the psychological dimension of fear which people otherwise experience. And so I have actually a very, very, I thought a very, very interesting quotation or not quotation, analysis of Nehru or what Gandhi meant. Right? And again, you think of the Nehru-Gandhi relationship, there are many dimensions to it. But Nehru's analysis is Gandhi's great contribution is he made a people fearless. And that's what allowed for the Indian independence movement to really emerge. I'll just share my screen and somebody can just read that quote out. It's from the Discovery of India. And yeah, somebody just please read this out. Yeah, somebody just read it, please.
And then Gandhi came. He did not descend from the top. He seemed to emerge from the millions of India, speaking their language and incessantly drawing attention to them and their appalling condition. Get off the backs of these peasants and workers, he told us, all you live by their exploitation. Get rid of the system that produces this poverty and misery. Political freedom took new shape then, and that, what is this saying? Political freedom took new shape then, and that produces this poverty and misery. Political freedom took new shape then and acquired a new content. Much that he said, we only partially accepted, or sometimes did not accept at all, but all this was secondary. The essence of his teaching was fearlessness and truth and action allied to these, always keeping the welfare of the masses in view. The greatest gift for an individual or a nation, so we had been told in our ancient books, was abhaya, fearlessness, not merely bodily courage, but the absence of fear from the mind. Janaka and Yajnavalkya had said at the dawn of our history that it is a function of the leaders of a people to make them fearless. But the dominant impulse in India under British rule was that of fear, pervasive, oppressing, strangling fear. Fear of the army, the police, the widespread secret service, fear of the official class, fear of the laws meant to suppress, and of prison, fear of the landlord's agent, fear of the moneylender, fear of unemployment and starvation, which are always on the threshold. It is against this all-pervading fear that Gandhi's quiet and determined voice was raised. Be not afraid. Was it so simple as all that? Not quite. And yet, fear builds its phantoms, which are more fearsome than reality itself. And reality, when calmly analyzed and its consequences willingly accepted, loses much of its terror. So, suddenly, as it were, that black pall of fear was lifted from the people's shoulders, not wholly, of course, but to an amazing degree.
Yeah, thanks. So I think I thought it's really fantastic kind of analysis and the understanding that the role of leadership is how do you make people fearless? Because that point comes across quite powerfully. And second point, I get on the psychological point as well, right? Fear builds its phantoms which are more fearsome than reality itself, right? So sometimes you have that sense of fear, you'll analyze it concretely. Okay, what's the worst which can happen? If the worst happens, what what will I do? Right? And once you think in that almost rational fashion, it loses most of its terror. And Nehru describes a lot of the entire question of going to prison, right? People have a terror of going to prison. And you analyze that closely with Nehru's words, and you find that once you analyze it, you say this is what I want to do. These are the consequences which will follow if I do this. Then that also loses much of its uh, terror. That's the way he puts it. Again, I think it's worth uh, thinking about, but I'll leave it at that. One more point to make on the case study itself. There are many points to make, but we just make a point on the case study, which is you can think of it. See what Suresh and Sala have been saying is it is not an easy time, right? And what our purpose is how do you give people a certain sense of a language which has legitimacy, which people can deploy and use in their struggles. That's really our effort here, right? And we're not saying you will necessarily always succeed, but it's very important to use the language of the constitution and the Nehru and Gandhi and Ambedkar in your articulation, because the constitution again is a document of a political morality which we all agreed to, and so we want you to try and utilize that language. And I want to take you again to the text of the constitution. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Can you see the constitution text now? Is it visible? Shall we do it again? Okay, fine. Now it's visible?
Yes, visible.
Yeah. So see the idea that again, based on for the case study, what is the language of the constitution which you can use to take forward the argument that you want to build, right? And we of course focused very strongly on the entire question of the fundamental rights, and rightly so. The 19th question we have to, of course, very closely, which we already closely looked at, and that's very central to this discussion. But the other one, of course, which also mentioned is 21, life and personal liberty, where personal liberty is read more broadly, or life is read more broadly to include the right to a clean environment, right? And we also mentioned, I think this just so you think of it in this fashion, right? When you're going through it, you fundamental rights, okay, that might be the fundamental rights part of it. Then we go back to part 4, which is the directive principles. Again, how do you use the language of the directive principle in whatever policy recommendations, protest letters, etc., that you're utilizing? For example, in this particular case study, right? Again, what does it have to say on the question of the environment, right? If you read 48A, it says the state shall endeavor to protect and improve the environment and safeguard the forests and wildlife of the country, right? So again, see, the point is you give yourself that moral legitimacy, right? Which is Suresh's example, Aishwarya. Right? Aishwarya in talking to the police or in fighting with the police, he's saying that we are functioning under the constitution, we are defending the constitution. How can you deny us the right which the constitution has given us, right? We have to start utilizing that language and when you're working or when you're fighting or you're arguing with authority. So 48A again becomes very critical in that. And the other, this is the question of fundamental, directive principles. The other section again to draw your attention to, which again is worth using, is the direction of fundamental duties, which are fundamental duties related to citizens, right? And it shall be the duty of every citizen of India, right? And here again is to protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers, and wildlife, and have compassion for living creatures. Right? So, when you're making your argument, you should be able to get in your 19.1 ABC, be able to get in your 21, you should be able to get in your 51A as a fundamental duty, and able to get in the directive principles as well. Right? And so, when you make that argument on why, for example, you think that you're entitled to go ahead and do your work in terms of in terms of ensuring that the deforestation stops, because you're obviously taking for a fundamental duty, you're obviously taking for a directive principle of state policy, right? So again, think of the constitution as a text which has many parts to it, though we're focusing on 19, right? It's always very important to think of what are the other linkages and connections you can make in the argument that you put forward. I'll stop with that. And we don't have time necessarily to get into the Kannabiran piece. I'll just urge you all to read it. And
maybe briefly, Arvind.
Briefly. Yeah, I think 2 paragraphs we have to read. Okay, I'll tell you the 2 parts of it, right? Why it's an important piece is one is the question of associational freedoms. It does a historical link, right? Linking back to the entire trade union movement, etc. That in the UK context, and how, for example, the again see there is a thinking, right? We often in international human rights law there's a division, right, between economic and social cultural rights and civil and political rights. One is seen as positive rights, one is seen as negative rights, etc. But I think the Kannabiran piece cuts through that, because the point he's making is you are advocating or articulating workers' rights. Right? But when you're articulating the right to minimum wage or the right to livelihood or right to social security, the freedom you really rely on is your right to freedom of association. Right? So the two are so deeply and intimately connected, not really dealing with. And people who say that civil liberties are a bourgeois preoccupation, his response is there's no reality to the grassroots level work. Grassroots level, the poorest people are organizing and using their organizing as a way of articulating the very, very important livelihood concerns. And that's the story of the trade union movement. That's the story of organizing during the Great Depression, the point which he makes. I just want to take you to maybe only one point from his piece, which I'm going to share again.
I want to ask you to talk loudly. Arvind, a little louder, please.
Yeah, I will be a little louder. Sorry, I think there's a problem with mine, which I've not been able to sort out. My internet, I think that's the reason why you're facing.
Yeah, it's a lot better now that.
Yeah, okay. I'll just try and get closer, then you're fine. Okay. Okay, the wages impunity. I'm just going to take you to a couple of key points he's making. There are lots of points he's making, of course, which we can't fully go into now. Yeah. So what again just to briefly share, right? He talks about the historical origin of the right to association in the UK context. Then he takes us to the Indian context, and in the Indian context, the point that he makes very strongly is we haven't really understood. This is a very important point. We haven't really understood the framework of the Constitution when we're making these rights, when we're making these claims, even before the court, right? And what is it that we haven't understood? We haven't understood the fact that the Constitution is a radical document which makes a departure from the past. That's what we haven't understood, and we haven't been able to articulate that in her arguments as it were. So he says there's a certain kind of a continuity between the colonial order and the current order. And the great example he gives you is the A.K. Gopalan narrative, which you must read. Right? A.K. Gopalan, of course, is a member of the Communist Party, imprisoned many times during colonial rule. And what Kannabiran documents and from A.K. Gopalan's autobiography is on the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, the speech we read, right? Nehru's speech, right? When India wakes to freedom, etc. What is A.K. Gopalan doing? A.K. Gopalan is in prison, right? Under the new government. Yeah, no, there's no screen. I'm just speaking, Shantanu. Yeah. So A.K. Gopalan is in prison, and he decides to also celebrate Independence Day in his own way. So he takes a flag of India and marches in the prison complex with the flag. And Kannabiran says that the next day he's produced before the magistrate on the charge of sedition. And the point he makes is that shows the sense of continuity, right? What a strange system where you've got independence and you're trying somebody for sedition, for exciting rebellion against the government established by law, which is His Majesty's government, which is what was being done till yesterday. And A.K. Gopalan makes a speech, right, in court. In court, saying that I'm being tried under the same law which Nehru and Gandhi and everybody else was tried. The tragedy is I'm being tried in independent India, and that's a metaphor. That's a metaphor for all that is wrong of the sense of continuity in terms of colonial laws, right? Which have continued over a period of time. So again, you think, okay, fine. Does that end with that? No. Kannabiran's piece then says, but what we have an obligation to in this context is our obligation is to understand the Constitution in a deeper sense and to draw out its radical parts of its heritage and make an argument based on that. What he calls, again, Suresh and Sala can elaborate much more on this, what he calls insurgent jurisprudence. I'll just read it to you. I'll make you read out one paragraph from that, and then I'll leave it to Suresh and Sala to conclude on that, because they know Kannabiran, they worked closely with him for many years. Yeah. Can you see this?
Yes, Arvind.
Yeah, please read that. The mark part.
Can one of you read it, please?
In all these cases, there has been no attempt at a radical interpretation of the Constitution or at forcing a discontinuity with the colonial legal framework. There has not even been a consciousness of the values inscribed in the Constitution. The communist movement, influenced by Soviet thought on the subject, was not really interested in the concept of rule of law or its validity, even in a socialist society. This concept has a long history. It evolved as a major check on power and the arbitrariness it engenders. But our countrymen have never been ready or willing to operate the legal system insurgently and to
And,
break,
Just
break
break the last line.
and to
Break.
sorry, I could not see the.
I'll read it. And to break the linguistic formalism into which the rule of law has become trapped. Right? So what he is again saying is that we haven't really understood, right, what this constitution is about, and we have an obligation to really understand what the values of the constitution are. And he applies that also to the context of the emergency, which is another big issue, and how we can think in a judicial sense. I'll leave on one last word on this. In a judicial sense, of a radical interpretation of the Constitution, in the minority opinion of ADM Jabalpur. ADM Jabalpur was the judgment which basically said that during the emergency, you have no right to move a court to challenge your detention. And the minority opinion by Justice Khanna made the point that your human rights are not exhausted with the suspension of Article 21. Your rights exist even if Article 21 is suspended. Even if the Constitution did not exist, you still have rights. And you can, and the court has an obligation or a responsibility to protect those rights. Again, we're talking about a radical interpretation of the Constitution. You have to go. Even in the darkest moment, which is the emergency, go to the minority opinion of Justice Khanna and think of how you can go back to the spirit or the values which underlie the Constitution. So I'll end with that. I think, sorry, we have overshot time already.
Yeah. Thanks, Arvind. That was wonderful. It's essentially this which brought all of us together to start this class, which is how do we as a group of people involved in the study of the Constitution bring about a radical reinterpretation of the spirit of the Constitution and the content of the Constitution in 2025. Unthinkable has happened. For example, in this case study, we saw that what started out as a terrorist act in a small 2-year legislation, which had to be renewed under TADA, then got into a law called the POTA, Prevention of Terrorism Act, that got transformed into Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, still a special act, and now it's become part of the normal criminal law of the country under the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. Okay, so this is the time that we are living in, when the government is arming itself to the teeth with all type of laws. Okay, so on paper we have fundamental rights. In reality, we are denied that fundamental right. It is in this context that unless we as citizens come out with a new thinking about the Constitution in terms of the spirit of the Constitution, the constitutional morality that we talked about, discussed about earlier, and the various freedoms, and give it a new 21st century interpretation, we will be buried under the hubris of history.
Or in fact, maybe not new, even old, like what it was envisaged by the, the Constitution makers. We are actually going back to the roots, to really understand what was the mindset with which our Constitution makers framed the Constitution. And we have lost sight of it.
And in that quotation that I sent you all today or yesterday about the person from the Constituent Assembly who said, my great-grandfather supported the British during the Sepoy Mutiny, and he was awarded a gold chain, a gold belt with diamonds. And 3 generations later, this son, the grandson, opposed him and repudiated what his grandfather stood for. And one can understand to what pains those people had gone to ensure that we have a constitution and a fundamental right, which we can still talk about today. It's still not gone. It's still existing in the books. It's not disappeared. And that's the challenge before all of us. Okay. So we shall come next week. We shall come to Article 21, the right to life, and explore it in greater detail. Okay. Good night, everybody.